do believe I am live. I also believe I'm terrible at figuring out how to make OBS do its thing, so it still says object instead of people's names, but that's probably because I'm not good at stuff. But I don't think I have to be. I'm mostly just a guy talking on the internet, and that seems like plenty. So yeah, hi everybody, welcome. I've got a couple people in the chat already, and hopefully that will turn into tens of thousands of screaming fans, but probably that might be overstretching. Yeah, and for those of you that are watching this either live or after the fact and have never heard of me before or whatever, make sure to like and subscribe and all the things that I'm supposed to say at the start of a YouTube thing. I don't need these in anymore. At least I don't think I need them in. If I need them in, they're handy. So I wanted to talk a little bit about education and indoctrination. That's the title of the video today. So first and foremost, before I do anything, let me just explain that I will never be a politician. I have no desire to be a politician, and things like what I'm saying right now would prevent me from being a politician, because we have a nasty habit of assuming that our politicians must always be infallibly wonderful and kind and sweet and loving and never say a bad word about anything, and I plan on probably saying a few bad words today. So this is here goes the end of my political career. Just kidding, I never have one. I did, however, used to teach college. So when I'm talking about education, I am by no means an expert on the subject, but I have done that. I was also the child of teachers. Both of my parents were teachers, so I come by some of this honestly. And I very much believe in teaching. I believe in the teachers' union. I believe in the necessity of what they did. But I also, like all systems, we can do better sometimes. And specifically, I'm talking about my own experiences and my own thoughts about particularly indoctrination. So I accept that the education I got as a kid definitely was very indoctrinating. I was taught to think in a certain way, and there are things that I was taught that were clearly informed by biases, both of the system and of my instructors. So fortunately, I was lucky enough to have the ability to work through those as I got older, or at least start working through them. It's not like I'm somehow a perfect thinker now or anything, but I think it's an important thing, and I think we need to constantly reassess how we are teaching and how we are thinking about the lessons that we're teaching kids. So in terms of what we teach and why we teach it, we have our four core classes that we usually focus on. Obviously, there's a million options that go with it, but you've got your science, your math, your English, and your social studies. And essentially what the concept of those is to round out a human being and give them some level by the time they graduate grade 12 or leave school if they don't graduate grade 12. But the idea is to give them some level of skill and understanding in all these things. So science is the course that we take that is designed to teach us about the physical world and how to interact with it. That one is an important class. We think about things like, don't put acid in your face as the important lessons of science. But I think the most important lesson of science is the scientific method, which is also probably the driest of components in the science curriculum. The scientific method teaches us how to come up with a question, formulate a reasonable hypothesis for what we think is going to happen, pay attention to the things that may affect our experiment, perform an experiment, and come up with a conclusion based on that. That's a critical and important thing, and I don't think we do that in our society nearly as much. And I say that with sort of tongue-in-cheek, because my job is computer scientist. Technically, that's what my degree's in, and there is no science in my job at all, and there never has been in my entire time working. It is a technical position. It is not a science position. We do not do experiments. So that's just me being a bit of a dink. But yeah, so science is about teaching us about the world around us and how to understand it, and how biology is how humans and animals and other things are composed. Physics teaches us how to swear at things like Planck's constant, and chemistry teaches us about the complicated makeup of things, and they all kind of tie together in this Gordian knot of that we call science. Math is a little bit more interesting in my mind for what people use it for and what they take from it. And I remember saying to my dad, who was a math teacher, saying, like, when am I ever going to need to understand trigonometry? I think that's something that almost every school-age child has asked their teacher, and I got an answer from my dad that was the best answer ever and has followed me in a variety of ways throughout my professional career, both as a teacher and in the workaday world. My dad explained to me that some stuff in math is important. The beginning core math things that you learn, how to add, how to subtract, are about how to sort of get by in the world again, right? If you don't know how to do math, then you don't know how to do your taxes. If you don't know how to do math, then you don't know how to figure out the change that you were supposed to get and whether or not you just got ripped off. Those are obviously very simple and spurious examples, but when you get into abstract mathematics, and it starts with word problems and it goes from there, what you're actually teaching kids is the beginning of some critical thinking and more importantly, abstract problem solving. So his answer to me when I said, when am I ever going to need to learn trigonometry? He laughed and he was like, you will never in your life need to learn trigonometry. But the ways that knowing how to do trigonometry tweaks the brain and allows you to think in different ways and creative ways is infinitely valuable to you and will be no matter who you are and what career you have. So I am a fan of that piece of math. Critical thinkers don't make good voters, though. Oh, you're absolutely right. Bright, spiked, sparkling undergarments. That is very true, and we here in Jason Kenney's Alberta, we don't do that. But I think that's we're actually eroding the value of math right now when we do things like my kid played me this rap video when he first moved in with me, and it was this guy going like, why didn't I learn how to do my taxes in school? And I watched it, and he was very vehement that this was absolutely true, and he had not learned anything valuable and all this stuff. And I was like, you learn how to do basic math, you can do your taxes. Taxes will change every year. But if you learn how to do the basic math around them, then you can do them every year because it's not that hard. It's just annoying and time consuming. And it's funny because he's never done taxes. He's a kid. Too much thinking leads to good things, then how will we run things? You don't want a happy, thoughtful population. That's a guarantee. But we've done this thing now where we've got abstract, or I think they call it abstract math and applied mathematics. I may have the terminology wrong, but basically it's like regular math and then math for people who want to go into mathematically related careers. And I think that's a mistake because we're not challenging kids as much with the abstract thinking. English was a subject that I loved. English is where you learn the power of language, and language as both in terms of how to properly use it and to expand your vocabulary, and also how to construct thoughts. That's huge. Vocabulary is important because and grammar and all the things that relate to it, because it makes you more and more effective at sharing your ideas. And the other pieces where you get into essay writing and things like that, and interpreting and analyzing, those are the things that teach you how to communicate more effectively in terms of storytelling, but also in terms of persuasive arguments and things like that. And those will serve us well throughout our lives, no matter what we do. And last came social studies. And this is the one that I'm going to pick on a little bit today. Not that social studies isn't important, or that there can't be massive changes to how we do all of the other courses. But social studies is kind of what led me down this particular path today. So, the old adage, if we don't learn from the past, we're doomed to repeat it. That's very true. And in theory, social studies is supposed to teach us that through teaching us history and geography and political and economic systems. Those are all fantastic things that, in a sort of perfect world, when we learn them through a proper lens, we understand how the world works in a very different way. Obviously, by the time you graduate high school, you're not ready to, go and run the world or anything like that. It's a foundation in all these things. But I think it's important that we have a foundation. Am I suggesting social studies is missing the social? No, I'm actually the things that I want to discuss are around indoctrination and around bias. So the easiest thing for me to pick on when I'm talking about this topic, especially being an Albertan, would be a fine man from the other side, and I'm using that entirely falsely. Jim Keekstra was a social studies teacher in my province of Alberta. I believe it was in the 90s, and Jim Keekstra had a small little bias when it came to this thing called the Holocaust and how he was fairly certain it did not happen. There was a whole thing. He was fired from his job. There was a very public debate about it. Obviously, that's an extreme example. Not all teachers are telling us that the Holocaust didn't happen, which is good because then we'd have to fire a lot of teachers because fuck that opinion. But the underlying idea stuck with me and made me think a lot, especially as I was putting this together, but sort of throughout my life. I've thought about that bias and certainly bias in a school setting and what that means and what it can lead to. So history, like I said, is about teaching us where we were, where we are, and how we got, what the steps were between here and there. Geography is supposed to teach us that the world is a bigger, better place than what we see in our backyards, and that there are people all over the world who have different cultures and different views and different this and different that. That's handy when you're dealing with, on an international level, but it's also an important skill as we grow. The idea that not all people are the same helps us in our interpersonal relationships, even with people who, maybe look and sound kind of like I do. We still don't think the same. At least I hope nobody thinks like me because I'm a broken soul. And then, of course, political and economic systems. Now, I'm going to bring up a chart because political and economic systems was where I first learned that things can be stupid. Let me just pop this open here real quick. So this is the political and economic spectrum as I was taught it. We have authoritarian versus libertarian, and we have left versus right. So this is talking about authoritarian. Well, in my time, it was totalitarian versus free, and capitalist and communist, because this is all that any child would ever need, right? And the theory is that this should cover off everything we know and need to know about the world and politics. I'm obviously being very spurious when I say that, because no social studies teacher would even think that. But this image of 4 discrete political systems, which is basically, this would be your left libertarian would be democratic socialism, authoritarian left would be fascism, authoritarian left would be communism, authoritarian right would be fascism, and libertarian right would be democratic capitalism. And that was kind of the options that we learned about and that we were told about. There's another image that I found. This is just an example of one. Using the same structure. Yeah, it's from Reddit. I'm borrowing. But it's obviously, I'm not going to go into detail, but like there's a huge amount of stuff that breaks into all of these different quadrants. And that depth was definitely not something that I encountered when I was a kid. So the the things that we learn in our social studies and in your high school social studies are very, very early on basic kind of stuff when it comes to how the world, in terms of the people that are in it and who's out there, what we think, how we interact, that kind of stuff. Sorry, that was a little bit awkward, but whatever. It's my stream. I'll do what I want. So one of the things I always get a chuckle out of, and this is going to seem unrelated at first, but it is related. You have this common narrative of when, my kid goes off to college, they're a good little right-wing Christian when I send them out the door, and they come back some weird, crazed, libertarian, leftist, Marxist, communist, whatever, bisexual, pansexual, and people get really upset about that, especially the more conservative. What's happened is the seeds of critical thinking are being planted in your kid's head during their regular K to 12 education or K to 13, depending where you live, and when they get out into the world and they get into a university environment, they learn a lot more and they encounter a lot more. Well, that video is not doing its thing, is it? It's just me glaring. For those in the chat, do you see me like moving around and doing things, or is it like because it's just frozen on my screen? So I can take it down and we can just listen to the soothing sounds of my voice. It's frozen. Okay, I'll stop video. I'll turn off the camera and you'll still be able to hear the dulcet tones of my voice. And I can also stop the virtual camera, which will free up some of my bandwidthy type stuff or CPU type stuff. Sorry. Okay. Anyways, the only thing you'll be missing out on is when I go, hey, this is a cool graph, and you'll just have to trust me that it's a really cool graph. So yeah, the question of when, oh man, I'm looking at the stream on my TV and it's coming from YouTube and it's completely broken as well. So that's lame. Oh well, maybe this will be a crappy thing. Maybe I'll have to redo it or something. But we'll keep through. We'll muscle through. So we send our kids off to college, and our kids get all exposed to critical thought more so than they have in the past, and they come back different than we left them. And that's ultimately the cause of critical thought, right? They are exposed to new things. They're exposed to things that make them question their internal biases, make them learn new ways of looking at stuff. It's all really fascinating to me. Only took 10 minutes of listening to me to figure out how to pronounce Red's Dead. Sigh, Red's Dead, Sugar, Jim, there's a reason you're an analyst by profession. How do things work? In spite of those who've tried to influence us, perhaps indoctrinate us, still figuring it all out. Hey, I'm here to indoctrinate you today, Calvin. So, anyways, one of the things that I'm very grateful for is that I've had a environment where I was strongly encouraged to question things. In fact, like I remember when I was about, I think, 16 years old, my dad, I was a good Christian lad, and my dad pulled me aside, and he said, son, you know that Jesus is the one true God, and you're going to, love him for the rest of your life. But what we want you to do is we want you to go out in the world and do your own investigations, because you will come back to the church. You'll learn the beauty, but you'll learn it through your own eyes. And I was like, that's wonderful. I will do that. And never did go back. And the reason for that is it's not real. The whole church thing, it's kind of silly. I used that critical thought, and I questioned the things that I was exposed to as a child and the things that I had always taken as writ. And I used critical thinking and was like, well, this doesn't make any sense. And the more it made no sense, the less I could convince myself that I had faith. Jesus, there was a whole tie to how this was going to work. My point is, critical thinking is important. And it's the way that we can get through the biases that we learned, the biases that we were taught, and the biases that we picked up from the world around us. Um, the big thing is that without confronting those things, we can never get better. So my country, 'tis of thee, my country did a thing not that terribly long ago. You can't hear for some reason. I'm going to close out of everything. Am I making noise? I think I'm making noise. Yeah, it looks like I'm making noise. Sorry, sugar. So my country did this thing. They decided that a long time ago that they would come, people would come here and we would establish Canada. And I learned about this in social studies. And what I learned about in social studies was just fragments of what actually is. And it's almost embarrassing that I grew up thinking the things I did, particularly about, as an Albertan, living on Treaty 7 land. The stuff that I was taught about how this country came to be, and the land that we're on. So we were taught things like, oh yeah, the natives was the term that we used at the time. The natives were they were wonderful, kind people, and we came and we all shook hands and we had a treaty and it was super awesome and isn't life grand? And part of our deal was we were going to help them and they were going to help us. It was a win-win. And that was very much the theme of what I was taught life was going to be with regards to living in Alberta. I knew that Treaty 7 was the treaty that applied to us, but I sure as fuck didn't know what was in it. I didn't understand anything about it. And it was very frustrating when I started to investigate that and realize how much I didn't know and how much I had really taken for granted. So, an example of that, we did not talk in my education about residential schools. Or if we did talk about them, we talked very quickly and very lightly about residential schools. The residential school system was like over 100 years. And I've actually got, again, pop open the browser thing. Gonna do this, and I'll go here. I'm doing this in specific because this is the important thing. The school system was created for the purpose of removing Indigenous children from the influence of their own culture and assimilating them into the dominant Canadian culture to kill the Indian in the child. Now that, you could not come up with a more evil fucking sentiment than the idea that we should kill the Indian in the child. But this is what the residential school system was. The basic premise, as I understand it, is they took thousands of children and they pulled them from their homes in the intent to educate them and to make them assimilate into Canadian white culture. And that's grotesque. That is absolutely fucking grotesque. If we rule out all of the things that happened along the way with that, and by the things, I mean the awful, terrible things like the incredible abuse of Indigenous children at the hands of their priests and whatnot that they were in the care of, and who saw priests doing that, right? Whoever would have figured that had come. If we rule out the suicide rate, if we rule out all the just genuinely fucking terrible things that happen, and just focus on the fact that the basic premise of this was to pull kids out of their environments and teach them to not know who they are anymore and to be like white folk, because white folk had it all fucking figured out, and that was very much our racial bias. That's horrible. And so we had this Truth and Reconciliation group that came about to investigate and apologize. And I can't speak to whether the apology is any good. I'm a honky, you know. Please, if you want to understand whether it is or not, talk to people who are actually Indigenous people who are engaged in the conversation, and they'll tell you better than I ever could. But I never heard about this, and I never heard about this all the way through. Like the last residential school closed in 1996. I graduated college the year after the last residential school closed. Like that's mind blowing to me that that this is something that lasted as long as it did. Like, you know, that is a lasting evil. But we learn nothing about it. I know that they talk about it in schools now, but I still don't know that they're doing justice to the conversation, and I certainly don't know how they're looking at the relationship between colonial Canadians and Indigenous Canadians. But that's a very important and a very fragile relationship. Yeah, so Sugar says there's four parts to an analogy, four parts to an apology. If the government was serious about reconciliation, they would tell the truth about money. I think they'd have to tell the truth about a lot of things, and the impression that I have as a honky on the outside of the conversation is that they have done a very good job of halfway almost kind of starting a conversation, but I feel like they think they've finished it. And I base that on, I'm going a little bit off topic, but I base that on when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report was put forward. I think the voice of the movement behind the missing and murdered Indigenous women was suddenly heard a lot louder and a lot more. More people paid attention, and the impression I have, maybe I'm wrong, but the impression I have is that my government went like, no, we already apologized. We're cool now. So I don't know. Yeah, racists always go to the money. Absolutely, 100%. In preparing for all this, which I did prepare, despite the fact that I seem like a tit right now, I was thinking about what I was taught in school about Indigenous people, and what I was taught about the colonization of the West. And I realized, like, I've never read Treaty 7, or at least at that point I haven't. I've now read Treaty 7. It's available online. In fact, I have it open in that same browser tab, so I can show you. It's right here. To get here, all I had to do was type Treaty 7 into the Googles. It's not hard to find. It's hard to understand in some senses because some of it is very contextual with regards to, and I'm not going to like go through it point by point and explain it, but I will make some sort of sweeping generalizations about it with regards to what I've read in my interpretation. But yeah, it's I had never read the treaty that defines the relationship that I'm supposed to have with the people who are the original inhabitants of this place. That's a little bit weird. I read it a few days ago, and when this idea started, well, actually, it's probably a couple weeks ago, when the idea, I wanted to talk about this, but I didn't know how I wanted to frame it. But that was when I realized I hadn't read the treaty, and I decided I needed to read it. So I did, and it isn't what I thought it was. Because what I was told essentially was that we came here and we had a ceremony and we gave gifts, and therefore all of Canada now belongs to white people. That's totally the understanding I had, and it's completely wrong. In fact, the lands that we're talking about, not all of the lands in Canada were ceded. I'm going to switch back so I'm not... There. Not all of the lands were ceded. This actually became quite newsworthy recently with the Coastal Gas Link going through the lands that, by unceded lands, I mean, there was no treaty between the Canadian government and the Indigenous people. They were like, no, we didn't sign anything. You don't have a right to tell us how to do shit. And it's really unfortunate to me, because if there was an understanding of what the treaties were and why they were signed, like I didn't realize that the reason that Treaty 7 at least was signed was part of the creation of the railway, the CP Rail, which was an important part of Confederation. It actually was the reason before CP Rail as a company came along, Sir John A. Macdonald got kicked out of office for failing at the railroad. But essentially, the purpose of the treaty from a white settler perspective was they needed to build a railroad. They wanted to do so. In reading the descriptions of some of the sort of behind the scenes stuff, it sounds like the Queen, in her magnanimity, wanted to like say thank you to the good Indians as they and all through the treaty it talks about the Queen's Indians, and it's like really cringy in today's context, but I'm sure she didn't mean anything at the time. But it was an agreement, and it wasn't the agreement that I thought it was. It wasn't that we get your land. It was that we're going to use some of it, and here's how it's going to break out. And this parcel goes here, and this parcel goes here, and within this parcel is an area that we're going to provide for this particular. I think at the time they referred to them as tribes. I don't even know what the appropriate term is now, and forgive me for my ignorance. But the thing that was quite sort of mind blowing about it was, and I again I'm reading stuff after the fact, not taking this in a legitimate social studies class, but the concept that the teachers missed all of this really bothers me. The agreements, part of the reason, as I understand things, that the indigenous people that were here were open to some of these agreements was because the population of buffalo was dwindling. I'm pretty sure we know exactly what skin color the people who made the populations of buffalo dwindle would be. Thinking this one, but the people who were the indigenous people who were here were concerned about, as the populations are dropping, and they were very much reliant on the buffalo for a major staple of their diet. And so most of what I read in Treaty 7, what I understood in Treaty 7, was around promises made by the Queen to the indigenous people to say, I'm going to support you in learning. We're going to educate you, which was what led to the residential schools, but we're also going to educate you in agriculture and evolving the way that the indigenous plains people that were here relied on, so they would have different food sources to rely on, which would have been a very endearing concept. And unfortunately, we didn't live up to our end of the bargain. And I'm not talking about in some grand esoteric, I mean thousands of Treaty 7 natives died because they were waiting on the Queen and her those in her employ to help. And they eventually did, but people died. There was massive problems because we did not, from the very get-go, we didn't live up to Treaty 7. And I have a funny feeling that all of the treaties are probably the same there. There's a whole thing around starvation. There are original policies you can read about for the killing of buffalo. I'm not sure what you mean, Sugar. Are you referring to like the ways that buffalo were traditionally hunted, or are you talking about like the arrangement within the treaties for how buffalo would be treated? I honestly have no idea, and I don't want to be like, oh yes, that was a 7 or anything like that, and be completely wrong, like a dink. Not knowing about this and not understanding that almost from the beginning of our treaty relationships with all of the people we signed treaties with, we didn't do our job, and we very much, we were colonizers and not friends coming over for a spot of tea, like we'll give you a little space, which is the impression I had growing up, was that we basically came to this great mutual agreement. Government official policies on killing the buffalo to control us and force us onto reserve and accept ration. Totally, I will happily, if you want, like, you can send me links and I will totally read up. I would not at all be surprised if the government was giving, you can't do that, and even the stuff that I was reading that says that the Treaty 7 people were open to the idea because of the dwindling of the buffalo. That may not even be a full picture. Like I say, I'm learning as I go, and I would love to know more about this because I don't want to be the ignorant bastard that I am. So again, this all made me start questioning what I learned in social studies and the indoctrination that I had that was the system is fine. Everyone be okay, the system is cool, everyone's happy. Native people live in reserves because that's where they want to be, and they have special problems like a genetic predisposition to alcohol and all the shit that I was taught. That's actually complete bullshit. They were mistreated by us, and that's just fucking facts, with plenty of historical backup. But that made me go thinking about, again in preparation for this, I was thinking about Oka. The Oka crisis was the first major clash that, at least within my awareness, in sort of recent years between Native people and the Canadian government, and I feel again like the party line got fed to us. We were taught. In class, we talked about it. It was all over the media, and the story that we were told was that there was a group of people who were trying to open up a golf course, if memory serves, and the natives wanted their piece of the pie, and they weren't satisfied, so they were gonna just start a blockade and be, because they were jerks and assholes, and they were pretending like they had some kind of claim on the land. I wish I had known about the more accurate view of the relationship between the Canadian government and the Indigenous people, because that's such a not accurate way of viewing Oka. Again, speaking as someone who's playing catch up, my understanding of Oka at this point is that this was a conflict between essentially I think it was like the 1700s. The church had licensed space that in land that they felt was theirs, but was in fact held by the Mohawk, or was owned by the Mohawk, and was sacred burial land for them. But they basically said, "No, we're going to put I think it was a church," and they expanded it a couple of times over the years, and there was battles back and forth about this parcel of land because it was very important to the Mohawk, and my mean-spirited brain now is like, yeah, probably I could see those assholes that were in the halls of power back then being like, oh, it's important to you. Well, we'll just build a fucking church on it. Enjoy that. But at the end of the day, the decision was made to sell the land by, I believe, the church, who I believe still was occupying the space, and they were selling it to a golf course. And the Mohawk people were like, fuck no, this is not how shit goes. This is our historical land. We never gave this land up. You never had a right to be there, and you sure as fuck don't get to turn it into a golf course. This is our sacred burial site, which feels a little bit different, on the surface than a bunch of greedy natives wanting their piece. Like that. This is the indoctrination I'm talking about, and it comes from the fact that we were not given an honest and objective understanding of this country, of the formation of this country, of the relationship with the people who were here first. And of all the things that had happened in between to sour that relationship even further. It's honestly heartbreaking. And then I think about like if we understood these things, how it would change. Like even recently, the ring road, when the ring road was going through, and the this is where I'm going to fail as a Calgarian. I believe it's Siksika that the ring road was going through, and the chiefs and council basically wanted to open negotiations and say like, hey, you're going to be coming through. You know what's in it for us, kind of thing, which is not an unreasonable. Yeah, it was Siksika. Thank you. I'm always. I spent a long time thinking that Siksika and Tsuut'ina are the same thing, and I have only recently found out that they're not, unless I'm wrong, in which case I would still be wrong. But I'm just very much trying to not fuck up all over the place as a stupid colonialist who doesn't know shit about shit. So, and it wasn't about like we're going to extort money. It was, okay, what are we going to do if you're going to use this stretch of land for road? How are we going to be compensated? How are we going to, what impact is that going to have? Not just compensation, but just impact in general on us. And how do we, as partners, work together? And we basically said, "Shep, you don't tell us what to do. We're Calgary," and turned it into, oh fuck, there's a big long comment there. General William T. Sherman and Philip Sheridan, eradication of the buffalo. Oh, that sounds like, yeah, those are very, very honky names, so I would have to believe that's the case. Held the view that people should kill every buffalo you can. Every every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. The governments on both sides of the medicine land had determined that there was an Indian problem. Oh, the Indian problem, yes. Indigenous people were viewed as standing in the way of progress and civilization and had to be eradicated. Government officials knew that many of the Plains nations depended heavily on the buffalo to provide all the necessary items to remain independent without much involvement of the state. Missionary John McDougall wrote about the Blackfeet in 1865 that without the buffalo they would be helpless, and yet the whole nation did not own one. To look at them and to hear them, one would feel as if they were the most important of all, or independent of all men, yet the fact was they were the most dependent among men. Just reading that and knowing that that sort of pure, unfiltered evil was policy, like that should make every single honky Canadian shake their heads in shame and be like, we have a lot to fix, and we have a lot we need to learn. Like this is part of the reason I'm doing these videos is because, or this particular video, sorry, is because I'm trying to both express that I don't know fucking anything, force myself to learn a little bit more and confront some of these things, and also hopefully, encourage other people to equally, question their biases. That's my hope, at least, because yeah, like that smear of text, which I'm assuming is like a direct copy and paste from what I would assume is Wikipedia, but could be anything. I just see footnotes. That is exactly the kind of thing that we were not taught about, but we all kind of slowly started to discover after the fact. When you hear, about this shit, it's repellent in every fucking way. And we continue to follow these same approaches, right? With like, and it's actually kind of harder to see in Calgary because Tsuut'ina is a fairly successful reservation. I think it's one of the stronger financially and in other ways reservations in Canada. And so it can sometimes, as a honky outsider, it can be really difficult to recognize that is, that is the case. We regularly hear people talk about like, oh, hey, goddamn Indians get everything, and Can't hear again. Oh, I'm sorry, sugar. After all that, you're bringing so much to the conversation, and here I am, quiet in your ears. Um, Fuck, what was I just saying? Yeah, sorry, idiot rednecks, and you hear them, and they're like, "Well, hell, I just don't understand why the natives get everything." Well, first off, Treaty 7 specifically outlines the fact that in perpetuity, and the word forever is used, um, indigenous people are going to be gifted things from the British Crown. I would bet that hasn't happened in a very long fucking time. Um, Again, not an expert, but if there's a deal, I'm pretty sure we Welsh done it. Well, did I just use Welsh as a like that's trying hard not to be a shitty person? If there's a deal, I'm pretty sure we've screwed them out of it because that's what, especially the British, seem to be good at. Um, but yeah, Treaty 7 specifically outlines, funds for the distribution of ammunition, funds for, parcels of land, funds for every year, different categories of families will get certain amounts of money. Like, so A, that's a stupid argument. And B, no, they don't get ridiculous riches from the Canadian government just for, being lazy, horrible, terrible people sitting doing nothing. That's completely ignorant. In fact, like I mentioned that Sutana is a fairly, Clows and Plows, $5 a year. Um, Sutana is a fairly financially one of the stronger reservations, but that most of that comes not from the fact that they own, or have this contract with the Canadian government where the government just like flips dollar billies at them or anything like that. It's to do with oil and gas rights that the land that they are on has access to a lot of stuff. So the tribe is tribe the right word? Fuck, I hope so. The band, the council, has made agreements with companies to utilize resources that are on the land. Sorry, gotta clear my throat. And that argument that, oh my God, all the all the money that they get. No, it's not. It's not money that they get from the Canadian government. It's typically money that they get from, because they built it themselves, from royalties from industry using their resources. Exactly, and that's what I mean. Not all reserves have that. I had a good buddy when I was in college, who was from a much smaller reservation in BC that had like nothing. They had land, and they were able to lease a small amount of it for a golf course, and that's it. They didn't have mineral rights, or they had rights, but there was nothing to mine for. There was nothing to natural resources. So they basically were like absolutely difficult life because they didn't have access to all the ridiculous things that all those darn native peoples get. Like, it's an ignorant sentiment. I'm going to try and get back on my point. That was the thing that I wanted to talk about ultimately, is critical thinking, both to challenge our indoctrinations and also to challenge the things that we're told, like ongoing told. My buddy was on here a couple days ago. We did again a couple weeks ago. Fod, and Fod is from Iran, and Iran is a country that we have a huge amount in our heads that is completely wrong. In fact, most of the Middle East, I think we are completely ignorant about. And I'm talking sort of by and large. If you've lived in Riyadh or something, you probably have a different perspective. But for most people living here, when we think, whether we know better or not, when you think of Iran, you think of a sketchy desert. Everything's super hot, super bright. People are riding camels and They've got AK-747s over their backs, and they're all terrorists, and they're all Muslims, and they're all this, and they're all that. That's really just a bad political cartoon of what Iran was and is. In the days prior to the Ayatollah Khomeini, in the rule of the Shah, it was a very, very liberal place. I think there should be more than social studies. I think everyone needs to learn about all religions. I would say yes. I know that one of the things that turned me off of religion was learning about a bunch of religions. And the more I learned, the more I was like, y'all are stupid. That's me being a dink from my own personal bias, so I'm willing to accept that. But Iran is an example of a country that it was very open and very liberal. In fact, the image we have of, like, women in burqas and stuff like that was not Iran in the 70s and 80s. The Ayatollah came in, and there was this resurgence of what we would probably call Islamofascism. I would call fascism. I don't think it's important to add the Islamo in there. That might be the particular flavor, but it's fascism. And the number one threat to everything that we know is fascist thinking. And critical thinking protects us from fascist thinking, because fascist thinking, by and large, is stupid and disprovable. But it's only disprovable if you have the tools that you hopefully picked up in the beginning, those seeds that were planted in your educational experience, and then nurtured throughout the rest of your life. I was watching a video the other day, and it was another YouTuber named Fosh, who is to me like New York is to Didsbury. I would be the Didsbury in this equation. He's very, very big leftist YouTube streamer guy. And Fosh was talking about, somebody said something about Islamofascism or whatever it was, and he's like, don't you get that this is the alt-right? It's just the alt-right on that side of the world. It's not that people were walking around all like, crazy jihadist psychopaths all along. Most of those countries were well, not most, but varying levels of liberalism and varying levels of essentially all manner of things. They were like everywhere else. There was a broad spectrum of humans involved, and it happens to be evangelical Islam that spread there. But here we've got evangelical Christianity, and in Burma they've got evangelical Buddhism, and all of the the blind acceptance of tautology. And I don't know if I used the word correctly there, so if I didn't, laugh at me. That theological fascism, and it doesn't have to be theological even, but that idea that we have to supplant, and we have to overthrow, and we have to beat down our opponents, that is ugly. And it starts with small things. If somebody, let me put it to you another way, and this is an analogy I love for talking about fascism. If, Saturday morning, door gets knocked on, you open the door, and there's a Mormon, and he says, let me tell you about plural wives and the fact that God once spoke to a man through his hat and convinced him that he was supposed to have sex with multiple women. That's not a conversation you would engage in. You would be like, closed door, and that would be that. It's a non-starter because it's ridiculous. In the same regard, someone comes up to you and goes, did you know that indigenous people who you know indigenous people, they're not actually human and shouldn't be treated as such? You would be like, get the fuck out of here, and I will punch you in the face. Those are complete non-starters. But what they do instead, the Mormons come to your door, and what do? They talk about family values and community. And haven't you noticed how things aren't the same anymore as they once were that appeal to nostalgia. And they weed you in slowly, and they give you just enough to make you feel like you're more and more getting a sense of belonging, and more the craziness of their theology just starts to become okay because you're getting it in small doses. I think the alt-right is the same way, and I think Islamofascism is the same way. I think these are all genuinely evil things that know they're evil on the surface and know they can't just walk up to you and go, hey, join my crazy cause for evil and we'll do great things together. But instead it's, hey man, let's talk about how we can make things better. White people have it hard too. It's not that other people don't. Let's talk about it though. Because we've got our own things. Why can't blah blah blah? Fuck off. But those are the conversations that if you don't have critical thinking skills, you don't have the reason to, the white pride conversation is the best example. Someone says to you, why can't white people be proud of being white? I can actually just see Sugar is typing. I will try to beat you to the punch. It's not that white people can't be proud of being white. It's that white isn't a thing. White is, and it's not even a thing that we've agreed on for like 20 years, let alone for forever. White isn't a race. There are various groups of people that we lump into a pool called white, and we decide at any given moment who we consider to be white. Used to be that if you had a white person and a black person and they had a baby, that baby was white. Now that baby's not white. What changed? Used to be that the Irish weren't white. Now they're white. What changed? All that changes is someone in the hate group goes, yeah, you know what? We'll let these people in, or I'm tired of having these people around, or whatever. Because it's a bullshit non-thing. And why can't you be proud of that? Because white pride, in its core, is not about being proud of the great and wondrous achievements of the white race. It's about being prideful that you have dominion over others, that we are the majority in the United States and Canada and Britain and various other places. It's not the same thing as a group of people who, for example, Black Pride. Black Pride isn't about, we're all proud of the great accomplishments of black people and fuck whitey. Black Pride is about, we have a common bond and a common set of experiences and a common this, that, and the other thing that is something that is under attack. And we should be together to be proud of the thing that is under attack because it's ours. Whiteness isn't under attack. I know white people want you to think it is. It's fucking not. It's fucking not. Oh man, I'm way behind reading this. I also have respect for people who practice religion. We already talked about that. They offer impoverished people food to indoctrinate them. That's why they're okay with people going hungry. That's their leverage. That's not godlike. I called someone pale and they lost their shit. Lol. I was like, well, if I knew your ancestors, I'd address them. And then I watched a 6 on South Africa. I don't know what a 6 is. I'm assuming that's a typo. And I took way too much pleasure in it. Way too much. I'm a bad person. Oh, Doc. Oh, no. I get it. And in that regard, I can say that, my childhood, we did not get raised to think that South Africa was good. I was raised during the end of apartheid, and we knew that was some shit. We knew that there was just nothing but institutionalized ugliness there. And I think, part of me now is wondering if we were taught about apartheid because it helped us not recognize the disparity in our own country. I went down to a protest a while back, and there was a woman talking. This was several people's stories echoed, but she happened to be an Indigenous woman, and she was like, and I was the only Indigenous woman in my school, and I was, held up as like, oh, and you can be Indigenous, like whatever her, and like everything about the Indigenous experience was immediately translated, and it just was one big, I don't think intentionally, but the end result was she was othered from like morning to night kind of thing, and I felt really terrible hearing that because I'm sure I've done that. I'm sure I've been that prick. Um, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So where I went to school, it, I only really figured out how dumb I was a few years back. I was talking to somebody and I was like, we didn't have, my school was very, very milky white. We had one Japanese girl and everyone liked her, everything was cool, but we only had the one. Even the Chilean girls liked her. And it never crossed my mind until that moment that I was like, Chilean people would not be considered white but like they had skin that was close enough to mine, but they were from South America, and in fact I think there was three families. Hey Jim, it's Chris. White pride's a joke. We shouldn't be proud of the history of enslavement and abuse we made for ourselves. BIPOC pride is legitimate. They actually have culture and history. Totally agree. Totally agree. White pride is ultimately, at least in every sense that I understand it, white pride is nothing but seeing other people use the word pride and snotty ass white guys going, well, why can't I use white pride? Why can't I use? Why isn't there a straight pride parade? Why doesn't the world fawn over me more than it currently does? Totally agree. Totally forget what I was talking about. Fuck. Well, at this point, I've totally lost the thread of anything I was trying to accomplish. But, what it boils down to is indoctrination bad. We need to constantly reassess. Oh, I remember one other point that I wanted to make. Indoctrination also helps us to believe that our system is right. I mean, I think that's probably the primary reason for it. I think that was the reason behind we were just talking about the schools, residential schools, was we know that honky life is the right life for me, therefore honky right life is the right life for everybody, and if we just force you to see that, well then you're kind of fucked and you'll have to go along. I think that indoctrination takes away our ability to understand that there are other systems. I certainly, I am a bullshit leftist libertarian monster. I believe in anarchy. I believe in a social responsibility that must be accepted and embraced by everybody in favor of supporting all of the people in the world. That's not a situation that I got taught in school. That's something I learned afterwards. What I got taught in school was that there's only one successful form of government, and that was democratic capitalist. Back to our little four-square model. That was the only thing that was right. Otherwise, you were a filthy communist or a dirty fascist, although they weren't so dirty because, we talk bad about them, but, at the heart, they're the people who run our businesses now. That's why I'm not going to be a politician. That indoctrination stems into so much other areas of our lives. Like, you listen to Americans talk about the Constitution, and they don't understand that those statements were true 200 years ago. That doesn't mean they're accurate now. This shouldn't come as a surprise, because these are also people who 2,000 years ago someone wrote a book and they're like, well, there's no more need for books. We got the one we got. I'm being an asshole. Not all Americans are like that, but Texas, I'm looking at you. I don't know. I feel like the indoctrination is a mistake. I feel like we need to question how we're teaching kids. We need to look at our curriculum and constantly look to improve it, and to, not just in schools, but outside, to share messages that, maybe we have the wrong side of a story, like Oka. Maybe we don't understand, when you hear that the chiefs and council for the Wet'suwet'en made deals with Coastal GasLink. So why are the hereditary chiefs complaining about it? Because that whole thing, and I probably did a shit job of touching on this earlier, that whole thing was white people not understanding a very long, complicated relationship between the Wet'suwet'en and the Canadian government. That chiefs and council role has no legitimacy there. It is a necessary rubber stamp for dealing with the government. The government won't deal with the hereditary chiefs, and that's, I believe, in the Indian Act, or the I'm not sure, but when they revised the Indian Act into the Constitution, one of those two places, or somewhere like that, it is basically you have to have elections. You have to have an elected chiefs and council. But the people who live in the Wet'suwet'en territories have always said, we didn't cede our land. We'll jump through those hoops because that's what we have to do in order to have this conversation with you. But our leadership for the spiritual and the all the things that matter to the people will be the hereditary chiefs. So they're the ones that Coastal GasLink should have been making arrangements with. And they didn't. They made deals with the wrong people and then refused to go back to the bargaining table. If somebody came up and said, yeah, I'm the guy that lives at Jim's house, sure, I'll sell it to you. And then some dude shows up one day with his stuff all packed up, and he's like, hey, I'm ready to move in. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? I got rights. I gotta know, like, we're having a conversation. If I sold that land to you, or that house, then, I have no rights in that situation. I've sold you those rights. I didn't do that. The hereditary chiefs had the control over that decision, and were not properly consulted. So, like, fuck them all. And by fuck them all, I mean Coastal GasLink. This is just another example of how, when we don't know the whole story, and we don't have a clear understanding of all the parties involved, we buy whatever we're sold. We buy the story that they hand us, and it's 9 times out of 10, it's completely fucking wrong. All right, I'm rambling hard now. I feel like I've hit the point probably about an hour and 14 minutes ago where I should have shut up. I may actually delete this video and try to do a better job of it at a later time. I'm not sure. There was that whole like Frozen thing that I wanna see how that worked out on YouTube, and if it sucks, then I'll delete the video. But with the promise that I want to do this again if I do cut it, and I want to make sure maybe I do it better. So Sugar, if you could send me the links that you were talking about earlier, and that would be awesome. Thank you. And yeah, I don't know. I got rambly. I'll be better at this one day, maybe. But I'm going to stop screaming now. Streaming, not screaming, although